Hello, everyone. Dr. Christine Smith here with a really cool guest for you today who is going to be speaking about healing from cancer naturally and doing it through understanding metabolism. And we were talking about it, and she just has such a fascinating story. And she's just a really interesting person. She's also written a book around nutritional Pilates, and she has board certified in holistic nutrition and a certified terrain expert in the metabolic approach to cancer. So hello there. How are you doing today, Katrina?
Hi, great to be here. Thanks.
Absolutely. So good to see you. I was just kind of telling everyone a little bit about you, and I would love if you could just share a little bit about yourself and however much of your story you want to dive into, and just how you ended up in this really intriguing niche of holistic healing from cancer and metabolic conditions.
Absolutely. So, the quick answer is that I had cancer myself. So, I had breast cancer, and the whole process of watching my body be able to detox the golf ball sized tumor that was in my breast, because I could feel it and see it, just amazed me. And I was already very interested in health. I was a Pilates instructor, I taught anatomy. But to start learning so much about how truly powerful food is and all the amazing tools that are out there, I just wanted to learn more. So I went back to school selfishly for me to make sure that I was keeping myself as far away from cancer as possible and for my family. But then as I got more and more into it, I just wanted to learn all the functional labs. And I went through, several years of extra training because it was so fascinating and I just couldn't keep it to myself. So I started working with clients basically because clients kept coming to me, friends that knew what I was doing, knew what I had gone through, and were like, I have cancer now, work with me. So couldn't keep it inside. The whole thing is amazing.
I like just what an amazing story. And I think so many people have gone through some kind of experience like that where it's just really overwhelming and trying to find different ways and different approaches to things. So I guess like a really good place to start is, what do you think people need to know to prevent cancer in the first place? And then maybe we can dive into things that we can do if that's something that has come up in your life, and then different approaches that you've used on the back end, and we can kind of approach it that way.
Yeah, absolutely. So the big thing that I like to encourage people in that is that it's not one thing. So with cancer, people are trying to, even the most holistic people, when they get cancer, they're usually trying to find that one bullet, whether it's the chemotherapy or the mistletoe or the IV vitamin C, whatever it is, they're looking for one thing. And that's the big surprise factor is our bodies are so much more complex than that. They're designed to address cancer in its ideal form, but what's happened is 6 to 8 different things have, made it so overwhelming. So there's this perfect storm to derail the immune system so that it can't do what it's supposed to do. And that's where cancer can be allowed to develop, so to speak. So when I work with clients, I'm looking for, let's get all the smoking guns on the table. I don't want any surprises. And there's still limitations to what we can test for at this time. So even with doing all the tests we know and finding everything we can, there may still be something that we're missing just because we don't have the capacity yet. But we have some pretty cool tests out there. And to find all these smoking guns is very, very powerful because then you can prioritize what needs to be addressed first, how we can, multitask, how we can make this nice and smooth and easy for the body as then the body is allowed to heal itself.
And the body is designed to do that. And I love how you talk about this because I think it's such a needed perspective in a really complicated clinical scenario. And what I'll talk to people a lot about is capacity, right? The capacity of our body. And I talk about really every disease starts with an injury of some kind, whether that is a physical injury, a chemical injury, or a mental emotional injury. Like there's such a big mental emotional tie because emotions are molecules, right? They're peptides and they are in our body. And if we don't deal with them, then they can kind of affect the way that our cells work. So that's a really interesting thing. And it also affects our hormones and our stress cascade. So one of the things that we can consider in diagnoses like this is our capacity has been reached for toxicity, for infection, for stress, for physical injury. And those are all the different angles that I think you're talking about with lab testing that we can look at, is like, what's contributing to that full bucket? What's contributing to our, what's known as allostatic load, which is like the literal capacity that our body has to handle things. And that's why one thing can work better for someone else and a different thing can work better for another person, because what's filling your bucket might be different. So it might be that we need to work more on toxicity for one person, or one person might have more of a history of infection, or one person might have gone through a lot of emotional stress or trauma and those kinds of things. And that's where addressing all of them, like that's the idea of holistic care. And I guess what would be one of the first things that you would direct people to, I guess, in preventative lifestyle, and then also in starting to investigate if this is something they're dealing with, or how you approach it with your clients?
Yeah, so many good questions there. So, in terms of preventative lifestyle, I think the biggest takeaway, besides the obvious diet cleanup, which I think you've probably shared with your listeners
Well,
so
feel
much.
free to talk about it more, because it's always something that people need to hear more about and be reminded of.
Yeah, I think the big ones in terms of diet would be the inflammatory oils and getting the carb load down, because, so much of our food is just junk. And then, the next thing would be making sure you try to get the chemical load down. And that goes into the other preventative thing that I would say is the big one that people don't talk about enough, is just the more you can get that toxic burden down, the less, like you're saying, the less pressure there is, the less of that allostatic load that's on your body. And it's the dumb things like, is changing my lipstick really going to make a difference? No. One thing is not going to make a difference, but it's going to be the lipstick and the moisturizer and all the different things add up to create that load that we want to minimize as much as possible. And, when I'm working with clients that actually have cancer, we're testing all the things. And one of the things we test is their genetics. So, for example, for me, I just suck at detoxification, methylation, all of that. And so I have a very small capacity that to really do a good job of getting that down. So for me, it's going to be always be something that's on my radar of like, where are the toxins? What can I reduce? Because that's just a little bit less for my body to have to deal with. And anytime I can take the load off my body, I am happy to do that.
Yep. And in our world, like, we live in such a complex world now. It's not the same world our grandparents lived in. Like, the amount of toxins that we were exposed to, it's like impossible to avoid them all. So just reducing it where we have control, like our food, is one of the easiest ways to do it. And I think I was trying to remember the statistic, but I believe it's something around like the American woman puts an average of 111 chemicals on her body before she leaves her house in the morning.
It's hot, bad. And they just did a study recently that they found like over 200 chemicals, a lot of which are toxins, in the cord of newborns' blood. Like, this is somebody that hasn't even actually been out in our atmosphere, but they're getting it through mom. And these chemicals, just, first off, separate issue politically, we need to not have them in our environment where we don't even have the choice. It's in our water, our air, our food, and all. But there are a lot of areas where we do have choice and we can make conscious decisions in our toiletry, things like that. It makes a huge difference.
Yep. And I just want to state for everyone, like, none of this is medical advice. Please consult your practitioner for your particular case. But we just want this to be considered, because no matter how you're approaching your care, and we have nothing against the conventional models of care, they can be life-saving and great, but just know that these are things that you can do to foster your body no matter what care you're going under. But as always, speak to your practitioner. But there's a lot of interesting things. And when we start talking about like toxins in the environment, I want to bring this fact up, because this is a fact that you can look up on the Breast Cancer Association website. A lot of people associate, genetics, like the BRCA gene. A lot of people know about the BRCA gene and they associate it with breast cancer. But there's a very interesting fact that out of all the people with breast cancer, I think it's less than 10% of them have the BRCA gene, which means that it's being driven by other things than just genetics. So I just want to put that out there as a fact for people to consider and know about their own body, and that is something that you can look up very easily. So just brings more power to what we're talking about when your environment takes a really big toll. So I guess as we're kind of talking about this, like I know you talk to people a lot about what type of diet they should be on if they're dealing with cancer. And I'll just start it off by saying a fun fact, like cancer cells consume sugar at 8 times the rate of normal cells. And I'll let you take it from there.
I love that. Yes, exactly. And the thing is, back in the 30s, Otto Warburg won the Nobel Prize for his work on cell metabolism with cancer cells, defining that a cancer cell has shifted their metabolism so that they need huge, vast amounts more of glucose, blood sugar, carbs, whatever you want to call it. So it needs that to grow because the new metabolism that a cancer cell has is very inefficient. And that's also why they create more blood vessels, the angiogenesis, to bring themselves more quantities of blood to get the blood sugar from it. So it's very, very important to get the carb load down. So a strict ketogenic diet is imperative, and not just for the blood sugar, like you're talking about, making sure it's clean, of course, like we already mentioned, but to get the actual ketones because they are super therapeutic for actual healing and promoting the apoptosis, which is where the cancer cells will, commit suicide kind of a thing and let themselves die finally. But this is all really important and can be done with food.
Yes.
Despite what the oncologists say that it doesn't matter what you eat, it does. And this is also important when you think about a lot of these alternative therapies like the hyperbaric oxygen chambers and such work, and the chemotherapies literally work much better when the person's in a ketogenic state. And yet, what are they giving them at chemo facilities? They're usually giving them cookies and juice, which is the opposite, and taking them into where chemo wouldn't be as effective.
Yep. And, Patrick Hanaway, MD, has a really wonderful podcast about his own journey with this. And he decided to mix functional medicine and conventional medicine in his approach to his care. And one of the things he talks about is that he specifically got his body into a state of ketosis before doing the chemo because it makes it more effective. And let's just review ketosis for a minute, because I think sometimes people get confused about what it is. So ketosis is when your cellular metabolism shifts from using carbohydrates for fuel to using fat for fuel. It's easier for it to use carbohydrates for fuel, so it will tend to go to that if they're provided, but you get more energy when you use fats for fuel. Now, as someone who's more of an evolutionary biologist, I think of the body as going in and out of ketosis, right? So it's this process that we go through. Because if you think, back in the olden days when we didn't have access to all the foods that we want at any time, we would not eat for a little while, or we'd be eating nuts and different things that we could find around. We'd kind of go into more of a state of ketosis because we don't have a lot of calories, and then all of a sudden we get a bunch of game and we'd eat a bunch of protein, and then we'd kind of go out of ketosis, that kind of thing. So it's we kind of go in and out of these phases, and I kind of think of the body as always going through cyclical phases, and I think of it as the same way of healing. It's we kind of have to go through different processes. So if we can start to learn how to foster our metabolism in this way, it can be really helpful. And one of the things about ketosis is it's this interesting state where it's almost mimicking fasting, because your cells don't have access to the carbohydrates. And then that state can send some of the same apoptosis signals, which is basically hey, body, will you please go clean up the cells that are no longer effective and efficient? So when we can get our bodies into these states, which is why fasting can be helpful in these scenarios, but obviously it's very dependent on the state that your body is in, which is why you should always consult your practitioner about if it's right for you. But if we can start to induce these apoptotic states, we can start to really clean up our cellular debris.
Absolutely. And I'm going to just piggyback on that, because getting into a ketogenic state, it actually is helpful for clients that are more at the end stage when they're cachexic as well, to prevent them from being a cachexic. And it seems kind of counterintuitive, and all the doctors usually are saying, no, eat lots of carbs, give them whatever they'll eat. But it's almost better for them, not to eat fast, or I'd prefer to do a ketogenic diet, because then they're getting in ketosis and it's going to stave away that cachexic state, which is really powerful and amazing.
Absolutely. So I guess, yeah, I'm curious about what kind of, like, how do you approach diets with people when they come to you? Let's just let it be a little open like that.
I love that. So I have a year-long program with clients, and the first thing I do is start with the diet. And I'm just gonna be honest, most of my clients, they're smart people. They have done the work. They're not eating standard American diet. They may be doing vegan or something like that, but it's usually a very highly tuned in diet, and we need to adjust it to get them into ketosis. And so that looks a little different for different people depending on where they're at, but helping them to really understand like where are the carbs? Not just like, oh, no bread, but oh, bell peppers and onions are vegetables that we want to eat, but they have more carbs than a cucumber. And the fine tuning that is very powerful because we want the predominance of their plate to be just vegetables, low carb veggies with lots of fabulous ketogenic sauces, and a little clean, healthy, grass finished meat. That's what you want your plate to look like. Now, we're doing all that while they're getting all the testing to make sure we get all the smoking guns. And for some people, this is super fast. And some people, they can be doing everything right. They have the beautiful plate, they're eating ketogenic, and their blood sugar is still at 115 all the time. And that's when we can find out with the testing, a lot of times there's something that's blocking. The thing that I see most often is mold. And the mold will screw up the hormones, it'll screw up the blood sugar. And this is a known carcinogen that people are not talking about, doctors are not looking for, and it's huge. Christine, I'm going to tell you a secret. I test this with all of my cancer clients. I've only seen one client not come back high mold.
Well, that's fascinating.
Right? Just kind of a little tidbit to throw out there because mold is not sexy, mold is not fun, and no one wants to deal with home remediations and all that kind of stuff, but it is a big problem and nobody's talking about it. Well, not as many people as need to talk are talking about
Oh,
it.
I completely agree with you. In a lot of my complex cases, I will find some kind of history of it somewhere. And it's like, yes, mold exists everywhere in our environment, and we were like designed to live with it. We weren't designed to breathe it in an enclosed space in our home. So that's kind of the difference. And it can unfortunately live in like homes that you move into that are older and that just didn't get remediated properly, because remediating properly is hard and a lot of work, and even the companies that specialize in it don't often do it correctly. So it's just one of those complicated things. But as she's talking about it, it's like it messes with your metabolism, and it messes with your hormones, and it messes with your cellular signaling. And if that's happening, your body's not going to be able to cleanse itself correctly, and the cells are not going to be able to signal each other correctly. And that's how you can kind of end up with some really weird cellular situations. And it sticks you in a state of chronic inflammation. It puts a lot of load on your liver, and then your liver is distracted and it can't focus on detoxing the other stuff, like our pesticides and our like air pollution and water pollution and all the weird pharmaceuticals that are now in our water that we can't really filter out anymore and stuff like that. So it's just one piece at a time, removing the toxic overall burden that your body is dealing with. And I think in a little bit, we'll get to the component of like the mental stress and addressing those things, which can often get skipped over as well. But yeah, I guess any other comments you want to share on like the toxicity mold front, because I do think it like, needs to be talked about more.
The mold thing is just such a huge thing. And I mean, I would just say, yes, we are, needing to live in this environment where we have mold and stuff and we're able to detox it. It's interesting though, because so this was a major driver for me because we moved into a house 8 months before my cancer showed up, and it had large amounts of black mold. We didn't know anything about it. My husband took it all out himself, no masks, like sitting on our porch, this huge, all the plywood down to the floorboards with the black mold. I remember it for weeks before he got to the dump. We didn't know what we didn't know at the time. So this is why I'm really passionate about getting it out there. But here's the thing, genetically, my detox capacities suck. I am not good at getting this stuff out. So having that huge extra burden was what threw me over the edge. Plus, I just had, 5 babies and stuff. So it was kind of like my body was already depleted. But it's interesting to see because, my husband had no problem. still has not had a problem. My 5 kids had no problem for the most part. A couple of them showed a little symptoms. And looking at their genes, they're the ones that take more after me detox wise. So to me, it's fascinating to see it's not just like, is there mold, is there not? But when you look at cancer clients, they usually suck at the detox stuff. And so they're more susceptible to the effects of any toxins, particularly mold.
Yes, and I just saw some good questions coming in for this. This is perfect. One of them was, how do we get evaluated? So perhaps after I ask this next question, you and I can kind of each talk about like how we evaluate people a little bit, just to let people know like what tests exist and what you can ask for, and like different ways that you can search for practitioners. So we'll get to that in a moment. And then someone else asked, it sounds like we're talking about cancers that make tumors. What about things like blood cancers? They've had their MGUS low for 27 years, but getting to the age where people can get diagnosed with multiple myeloma. So one thing I'll just say before I let you dive into that is I would still approach it really similarly. I would take all of the different burdens that the body is dealing with out of the picture as best as I can, and then I would foster cellular function and the body's ability to cleanse itself. And that would be a great baseline foundation for really any condition that you're dealing with. And it sounds like, when I say it like that, it sounds like you do the same thing for every person. I'm talking about the concept and the principle that we're working with. How you do it is different for every person. So I'll let you comment on that there, and then we can dive into kind of how we analyze people.
Yeah, that's 100%. So it sounds weird, but cancer is cancer. It doesn't matter if it's skin cancer, breast cancer, a tumor, solid cancer, or liquid cancer. It doesn't matter, in the sense that you still want to look at all the different 10 areas that can go off. So one of those areas is toxins. One, you mentioned earlier, is the emotional component. One is the metabolic component. So you want to look at that. And depending on the specific person and which of those 10 areas are off, how they're off, it looks completely different how you support them, but you're looking at the same areas, whether, it doesn't matter which type of cancer. Exactly.
Yep. And there's a lot of different approaches to things, and where like different types of cancer matter for sure is what you're using to help the body in its process. Because like I love the amino acid glutamine. It's really helpful in a ton of ways. It's helpful for healing the gut lining. Some cancers it's inhibitory for, and some cancers it's stimulatory for. So just like keeping that in mind with different people, where it's like they might benefit from different nutrition. And this is where working with a practitioner that specializes in this stuff, like Katrina, can be really, really helpful. And so there are other docs that'll also use like biohacking technologies. There's another wonderful doc here in Colorado that specializes in cancer. His name is Mark Carney, and he does some really cool biohacking stuff. And so you can use different technologies that are out as well to help the body with detoxification. But I also think in detox, and why it's important to work with a practitioner, is exactly what she was saying about your body and your genetics and how it can affect people. Because if you don't detox as well, if you have someone just put you on a giant detox program and it pushes everything really quickly and too fast, it can actually be a burden to your body. Or if you do detox in the wrong order, that can also be a burden to your body. It's kind of like you have to hire garbage men before you put the trash out on the curb, because if you put the trash out first, it'll just rot if you don't have the garbage men to come pick it up. It's kind of how I think of like the liver detox phases. So with detox, you're actually kind of moving backwards. You have to make sure everything that's moving out of the body is working, and then you can start pulling things out. But why don't you touch a little bit on like how you like to do your analysis, or any comments you had on anything I just said, and then I can talk about how I do mine, because we definitely work differently. And this is why I bring on these different specialists for you, right? Like I definitely work with, like I've worked with people on either side of it, but if someone has like an active cancer engagement that they're dealing with, I will usually refer them to one of my friends that specializes in it. So this is why I just like bringing these people on, so you know they exist, you know how to find them.
Thanks. Yeah. I love your garbage truck analogy. That's fantastic.
Yeah.
It's really, really graphic, and you know what you're talking about then. So you're talking about in terms of the mold testing, or are you talking overall?
Maybe we can just talk a little bit overall. So like maybe you just walk us through what you do with a new patient coming in and what you'd be looking for and how you'd approach it.
Absolutely. So I start with diet, and concurrently, while they're dialing the diet in, we do all the testing. And I do it all right up front. So we do a very comprehensive, extensive blood work. We do a Dutch test for their hormones, adrenal and sex hormones. We do a stool panel. We do a genetic panel. We're looking at all the different tox panels. So, like heavy metals, mold, non metal chemicals. I want to see all of it because I don't want something to surprise me later on. And so, as we're waiting for those things to come back, diet's dialed in. We start to tweak and optimize their HCl levels to make sure that they're digesting things properly. And usually there's some things that have come up in the paperwork that might need to be started working on that's just obvious, like, oh yeah, I don't go to bed till 2 in the morning, or let's work on that. Um, in addition to that, that's when, if the client doesn't already know what that emotional issue is, if there's anything there. So let me back up. In the year prior to a cancer diagnosis, there's usually something that has deeply injured the client's heart. That can be a wide array of things. They may know about it. I've had clients like, oh yes, my dad died, 6 months before I got my diagnosis. Like, clearly there's a connection there. Or it can be something subtle. For me, it was very subtle, and it's taken me years to even identify what was going on and have the ability to deal with it. So if they know, then we start to work on that. And that may mean they need to refer out. They may need to get some counseling. It'll look different for different clients. And then as the testing comes back, like I said, I'll go over what shows up. So they have their smoking gun. They know which of the 10 areas are theirs that they're going to need to kind of keep their eye on ongoing. And we'll create custom protocols for them. So that would be, maybe some tweaks to the diet, lifestyle implementation, supplementation, different protocols. For things like mold, that's going to mean diving into checking your house and making sure that your environment is not bringing it in. And then, of course, all the other toxins. It's a really huge detective work of, like, I'll give you an example. So I had a client that had very high levels of benzene, and not that crazy. It's kind of like a byproduct from fuel and stuff. She lived out in the middle of nowhere. There were no highways, no freeways, no flight patterns. We tested her water, like nothing. And we were just, Well, a couple weeks later, she had her tailpipe fall off. She took it to the mechanic, and he said, oh, by the way, that pipe that, feeds up into your car has all these holes in it. So, like, basically it was feeding exhaust into her cabin at a level where she couldn't smell it constant. So
That's fascinating.
figuring those things out can be, a whole thing in and of itself, to make sure that that inflow stops. And the testing there in that case is really just showing us, like, what do we need to look into? Where do we need to do detective work and such?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. No, I think that's a beautiful example. And so and I'm just going to recap because, that was a lot of knowledge.
Yeah.
So we can look at the gut and we can figure out what's going on there. That can be a smoking gun. Like, do you have a lingering gut infection? Did you pick up some parasite when you were traveling, or when you ate weird sushi from that one place that maybe you shouldn't have eaten sushi from? And it's like, it can just happen sometimes. Like, sometimes you just pick up weird bugs, and it's not to say like that thing caused it. It's just that's one piece of your burden, right? So, like, how can we remove that burden so that your immune system can do other things, like taking care of aging cells that shouldn't be there? We can also look at food sensitivity. So if, let's say, you did have that infection and all of a sudden you kind of got some gut permeability that you weren't aware of, and now you're like sensitive to dairy without being aware that you're sensitive to dairy because you never were, but now you're like, I guess it does make me puffy now and it didn't used to. Sometimes you can be sensitive to, like, vanilla. Like, I've seen the weirdest things pop up on food sensitivity tests, and then you just remove it for a few months, the immune system calms down, the gut can heal because you don't have this battle going on all the time. So that's like another thing you can look at, and those change over time, right? So, like, I rerun those and have people rotate their diets and rotate their food, and sometimes you need different things at different times, and you have a tendency usually to develop sensitivities to things that you eat a lot of when you're in a stress state, whether that's emotional or physical. It's just like the way it works when your immune system is in a danger state, and then you eat something and it's exposed while it's in that danger state, you make a danger signal to it. And that's your antibody, right? It's like an immune tag. And then she also talked about looking for toxic burden. That can be environmental toxins like mold, it can be pesticides, it can be pollutants in the water. Like, unfortunately, especially if you live in farming communities, our water has tons of glyphosate in it. So one of the like super easy things you can do, it's like the plug and play where you forget about it to help your health. Get an air purifier, like a nice high quality one. I really like ones from Healthway. So if anyone has questions, just message me. And then there's also water purifiers that I really like. And having those, you just plug them in your house and then you like forget about them and you change the filter once every 6 months. And it's such a easy way to start to negate toxins in your environment. And I dealt with my own mold exposure. I can't even imagine how much rougher it would have been on my body if I hadn't had a really nice air purifier running the whole time. Or like I have a sister and she's an artist and she deals with minerals and spirits and paint fumes, and she has an air purifier right by her workspace to mitigate that amount of toxic burden on her body. And we talked about those. So yeah, looking for infection and looking for inflammation. There's other tests you can do for like neurotransmitter stuff, for, you know, autoimmune markers, and it'll just give you really good information about where the body's at. Hormones is another one I like to run, but I really specifically like to look at cortisol and your adrenals, which I find people think hormones, they just think about sex hormones and they forget about your adrenals. And to properly run that, you have to do a salivary test multiple times throughout the day. And most people only do a single blood marker, which really doesn't tell you much. So just know that all these things exist. And if you guys ever want to learn more about lab tests, I actually did a little course on it not too long ago, and that link is in my bio. You're welcome to just kind of learn about it more on your own. But it sounds, you know, she and I kind of do similar things, but maybe look at it differently. And for myself, like I also do a huge history intake, and you know, it usually takes my clients 30 minutes to fill out my intake form, and I'm not sorry about that because it gives me a ton of information, and then I get to spend the rest of my time asking you weird questions that I wouldn't have thought to ask because you filled out this particular piece of my form, rather than me spending our precious time asking you what you ate for breakfast. So I'll also have people do a food journal, and I'll start kind of tracking what they're doing and tracking those weird little things that they do in their life. Like, you know, how's the status of your car? Or I had someone who, and this is a different scenario, this is an injury, right? But just an example of tracking those weird things. Someone with neck pain, and we were working on it for a really long time, and it particularly happened when he lifted his shoulder. And we did a whole bunch of stuff to it, and you know, it just hadn't really quite healed. And then I finally ended up asking that question. I was like, do you ever like lift anything in your car weird? And he's like, oh yeah, I lift my backpack over the center console with the same arm multiple times a day. I was like, that would be it. And stopped doing that and it went away. So sometimes it's just finding those weird things that people are doing in their life that you think has nothing to do with what's going on, and then adding them all up. And that's what really adds into the overall burden. And same thing goes for an injury. And if you have an infection in your gut, I consider it an injury. And then your body goes through this whole cycle. And she and I were talking the other day about like the healing cycle that the body goes through. And so I'd love to hear your thoughts on this after I say this little piece. So our body kind of goes through a stage called hemostasis, where it's like, stop, let me look at all the things, don't bleed out, let me just like fix this, just stop moving. And that's when our system kind of shuts down for a minute and it's focusing on something. The next stage is going through inflammation, which is like clearing debris, bringing in new materials to repair the area. And we can kind of get stuck in that inflammation stage sometimes, because as we do that and more cells come in, it can cause a little bit of damage. And then our janitors of our body, which is like monocytes, they can't really keep up. And then we don't get to go into the next stage, which is supposed to be assimilation. And that's where we kind of rebuild everything. And then after assimilation, there's the remodeling, or like the longevity stage. So it's like helping the tissues become functional again. That's a full healing cycle. If we don't get to complete that full healing cycle and we just keep getting stuck in the inflammatory stage, or we don't get to fully rebuild something, that is how we can kind of go down this cascade over time that can turn into a disease. And if we're distracted doing that, we're not going to get to cleanse and repair other parts of the body. So if you're constantly eating foods that inflame you, even if they're healthy foods and you just don't know that they inflame you because you have a hidden sensitivity to it, that is a consistent injury that's not getting to complete its cycle. And that is how your immune system can get distracted from other things it needs to do. So would love to hear your thoughts around just that, whatever popped into your mind.
Oh, that was a beautiful explanation. And I love that you're tying that all into inflammation, because the inflammation is one of the areas that we're looking at with cancer. And with cancer, you're going to see that that is the beautiful spot to really look at those markers, to watch things going sideways before you're going to see like tumors exploding and stuff or growing dramatically. So I look at all the different like HSCRP, the SED rate, and the LDH with the isoenzymes. Those are the three, the trifecta, if you will, that I watch every month. Because if something, whether it's a protocol that maybe is too aggressive, or maybe there's some new factor, or I've had clients where they go do like they have too many cooks in the kitchen, they're doing other things on the side, and it's like I can see if it starts to go sideways when those inflammation markers go up, because inflammation is like a key component. It's a trackable thing with cancer. And it's really nice to be able to see, really kind of peek into the window of the body and see when that inflammation starts to creep up. We know that something's going wrong. And this is why you just explained it so beautifully, because everything is going to be driving that when it's not operating on full capacity.
Yep. And I think one of the reasons that we both focus on gut so much is like, well, one, it's like one of the last controllable things in your environment is what you put in your mouth. So it's just like a really nice, easy way to be able to work with yourself at home. And two, like our neurotransmitters and our brain function is greatly affected by our gut. And there's even been research showing that we have basically like retroversion, so molecules moving up the vagus nerve into the brain. So if your gut is really inflamed, it can also affect your brain health. And when somebody has cancer, I don't think of it as like that's the only thing going on. I think of it as like that's the end point of your body having been at capacity for way too long. So really, it's just we need to like undo all these pieces that got you there, and your body is designed to start taking care of those things. And depending on what you're going through, working integratively can be the best way to go. So definitely not telling people to not go the conventional route, but mixing it with holistic care, I think, is incredibly important. So let's dive in for kind of like the last part before we wrap up here around the mental, emotional, energetic component of things. I'd love to just kind of let you talk in your own way about that and your approach and thoughts.
It's so important. There's so many aspects to this that are important. I mean, I mentioned the trauma that's probably happened that needs resolution, and working energetically, working, with the talk therapist, however it needs to be resolved if there's still active issues there. But aside from that, there's also the component like you were talking about with the neurotransmitters that, I talked about a lot of stuff when I discuss like what I do with a client. Like if you have cancer, a lot of times people also have these neurotransmitters off and they're depressed. They're not in a happy, good place. And you want me to eat what and take how many pills and do coffee enemas, and like it just overwhelms them. So honestly, the place that a lot of times I need to start with clients is, let's talk about those neurotransmitters. Let's look at an out test and see what's going on, and really dive into making sure that they're optimized, making sure they've got their B vitamins, and and their proteins are broken down properly, so they have those building blocks for those neurotransmitters, because they're not going to be compliant and get the results, especially not in timely fashion, if they're at all depressed, if they're overwhelmed. And so making sure also that they have, a good support network, not only psychologically, but to actually get the ball rolling of implementing the diet and the lifestyle and stuff, because it can be really, really overwhelming for people. And let's just state the obvious, with cancer, you have a little bit of a clock going, depending on how aggressive that particular form is, where you don't want to be dilly-dallying, but you don't want to stress the client out. It's this double-edged sword of you need everything to come together.
Yes, 100%. And I think what you were just talking about, like not only like the unresolved emotional stuff that you might have, from life or earlier in your life or childhood or whatever, but the emotions that come with finding out that your body's going through that, or that you're dealing with some kind of illness. Like it's kind of an identity crisis. And there's a ton of grief that comes with it, of grieving who you know yourself to be, of futures that you were anticipating or things that you have to let go of while you focus on this for a little while. And just understanding that that in itself is a part of the healing process, and like allowing room for the emotions that come with it, because otherwise they get stuck and they just turn into chemistry. There's a whole book about it called The Molecules of Emotion, and
Yeah.
it's really quite fascinating. But understanding that, yeah, not just the old emotions but the current emotions that you're dealing with, and having the right kind of support. And I just I'm also a huge advocate of body work. So I think having some body work while you're going through things can be huge, because it's just this person where it's their job to like lovingly touch your body and help move your energy, and it stimulates your detox pathways and it regulates your nervous system. And this goes for tons of kinds of body work, like acupuncture, massage, craniosacral, lymph drainage, which can be really important for detox, chiropractic for balancing your nervous system, different kinds of practitioners who have the same degree that do totally different work, and understanding sometimes you have to shop around to find somebody that you like. But having that as a part of your care team, I think, can be really regulating for your system on a energetic, emotional, nervous system type level. But then making sure that you have support, in the emotional way, whether that's working with a counselor or having family support or friends or a support group even of people going through the same thing, because sometimes family can't totally understand what you're going through, can be incredibly important. And this is where it's really cool to find practitioners like herself, where, if I'm not mistaken, I think you do some group programs too, right?
Yes, yes, we are launching our group program very soon, and I'm super excited about it because we've done retreats, and the group vibe and the community and knowing you're not going through it alone is incredibly important. Because it's one thing to have cancer, it's very isolating in and of itself, but if you start doing like weird things that not everyone agrees with, you even more support, which is really important. I would say probably on that path, one of the most helpful things I think I ever did on my cancer journey was I sent out an email to everybody I knew asking for prayer over this and letting people know what was going on, just because I got tired of telling everybody over and over and over again. I wanted them to know, like, I'm doing this outside the box. I have a plan. I'm not just throwing wet spaghetti at the wall. And I said very lovingly, if you don't agree with me, please keep it to yourself, because I don't want any negative energy in my space, because I need to keep this safe and healing. And that was probably the best thing I ever did.
Well, and I think that's hugely important, because your brain is the most potent pharmacy you will ever have. And there are tons of people proving that work, like Dr. Joe Dispenza's work, where uh, if you haven't read about him and you're dealing with anything like this, I highly recommend looking into his work. He has multiple books, he runs retreats and stuff, but it's teaching people basically how to use their own brain as a pharmacy through meditation, and understanding how your body works, and understanding physics and chemistry and the science behind it all. So he's very scientifically driven, and all the research is being done, and there's thousands of people that are literally changing their gut with like meditation alone. And he has a number of stories of people reversing their own like stage 4 cancer, and people with MS getting up out of wheelchairs. And like your body is amazing, and to think that we fully understand it would be incredibly naive. And so I'm a huge fan of fostering it. And it's kind of the difference between the pathogenic model, which is let me find everything that's wrong and suppress it, and the vitalistic model, which is let me find everything that's right and bring it out. And I
Mm.
think that's a lot of what we're talking about, and especially in holistic care. And that's why the emotional stuff matters, is it's like your brain produces chemicals when you feel certain emotions. And I'm also just going to put this concept out there for you. You can get addicted to your negative emotions, because they work around receptors that also kind of work with opioids. It's almost like it has like that same addictive effect. And we also get stuck in what's familiar. So if you've been depressed or anxious for a long time, it can feel uncomfortable not feeling anxious. And it's almost like you missed something, right? Because that's like the definition of anxiety, is being hyper aware. And starting to learn and practice how to be in these other emotional states that are positive, and making requests and boundaries like she was talking about, of hey, like this is what I need right now. And if you have other thoughts, please save it for a different time. And you're allowed to do that. You're allowed to make those boundaries. So anyway, just wanted to throw that out there. But any other thoughts on like the energetic, mental, emotional side or advice that you would give people? And then we can kind of talk a little bit about how they can find out more about you if they want to reach out or anything.
Absolutely. I think the biggest thing for the energetic emotional side is that people need to deal with it. This is the area that I find people do the little ostrich where they stick their head in the sand and they pretend it doesn't exist. And it's very, very easy in the cancer journey when people are talking about, you know, the therapies and the treatments and you take this and you do this at a certain time, you eat this and you don't eat that. Like, it's very easy to get focused on the to-do list. And that can just slip away. And it's a huge, huge part of it. And I have to tell you, like, I knew during my cancer journey there were issues. I kind of knew what they were, but I didn't really want to deal with it. And this was me. This was totally me. And it's, you know, 8 years later, and now the stuff is there, and I've dealt with it. But it's it's very easy to set that aside. Not to say you can't heal without it, but it's a large component. And I'm a big proponent of, like, even if you're in remission, like say I have a lot of people that come to me that have done standard of care, whether they just did surgery or they've done the whole kit and caboodle. But that, if you don't get to the root cause of why all these things that create this perfect storm to let the cancer proliferate, if you don't address that, it's going to come back, because the soil, the terrain that grew the cancer in the first place hasn't been addressed. So that emotional component would be one of those things that you really want to just make sure is top notch. Because I don't know about you, but I don't want to live under that black cloud of fear of it coming back, and I don't want that for my clients either.
I think that was a really great way to put it, right? It's like if you don't clear it out, the terrain where it grew is still there. I think that's a very important point. And, you know, also there's, and I'll just put like one last comment around the emotional stuff just from different things that I've learned. So, yes, like we absolutely have to deal with our stuff. And it's kind of like doing a painting. You have to take out all the paint, you have to get really messy and do a bunch of stuff, and then you have to let it dry. And you have to like clean everything up and you put the paint away and you like let it dry and you go do your life. And then you come back and you work on it again. You make a whole different mess. And then you have to clean it all up and then you have to go do your life while it dries. And it's kind of doing this over and over and over again until you have this piece of artwork that's really only done when you discover that it's done. Like no one else can tell you when it's done. And additionally, I think it's really important to not spend all of your time sitting there with paint all over you in a mess, right? You have to also take time to go like enjoy your life. And sometimes it's going into the story, figuring out what the story is, figuring out what's wrong. Yes, that can be a piece of it. But you'll also hit this point at some time where you're like, how much more am I going to get out of this by digging through all the gunk? Or have I done enough to get the understanding that I need? And now I just have to focus on remembering everything that that story made me forget, just like how to enjoy my life and how to be present and how to be grateful and how to be excited and how to look towards the future again and practicing those things. And that's a lot of where the other healing comes from. And before we wrap up, I just saw a couple questions come in, so I want to address them. So someone asked if insurance covers these tests. Sometimes, not often. A lot of insurance doesn't cover functional testing, unfortunately. Sometimes you can submit super bills, but there's weird things around insurance where when you do, sometimes if you submit it and they don't cover it, then they'll end up charging you more than you would have paid cash. So just weird things like that. And your practitioner won't always know. So it's just one of those things you have to ask your insurance company. But you can try with the right codes, but no guarantee. And then someone would say, how would you explain babies and young children who have had reasonable diets in their short lives and no mental depression? I'm
Yeah,
not, yeah,
that's
go for it.
a question. So yeah, this is happening more and more. And I would say there are still some of those areas that they're probably not looking at, whether, and I would say probably a lot of them are toxins, but there's other components that are going to be affecting them. There's probably some genetic hiccups. There's, some different stressors going on in their life. And stress doesn't have to be always bad, but it's stress and different things that people aren't looking at where, yeah, it's unfortunate to see this happening with kids more and more and more. And this is why I think we both get so passionate about the toxins, because it's just that thing that's just overloading us and messing our bodies up so much that people aren't necessarily aware of.
Yes. And I'm going to say one other component. So, and this is just awareness, right? Because I know parents, they often put like all of the blame on themselves, which, come on, like that's not realistic. We live in a tough world. But one thing I will say is it can take 3 to 6 months to properly detox your body and for your body to create a detoxified, healthy egg or sperm, which can then make a healthy gamete. So if you're preparing for pregnancy, it can actually be really important for both mom and dad to detox their body for 3 to 6 months to create a non-toxic environment to grow a child in, because there is a disturbing amount of toxins found in umbilical cord blood nowadays, and it's just the reality of the world that we live in. And so, not to be scary and not to be blameful, but just awareness of what you can do about it, really is what it is. It's like bringing awareness to it, so you're like, oh, okay, so if I am preparing to conceive, it could be a really good idea to work with a functional medicine practitioner for 6 months prior for both me and my partner to help our bodies be in an optimal state so that when we do create a child, it's the healthiest possible child.
Yeah,
So just a little concept there.
that just speaks to my heart. So I have 7 children, and it's fascinating if you look at their different birth weights. Over the course of how I learned about nutrition and all these things that we're talking about, it made a huge difference in their health. And I've apologized to my older children many times, but I didn't know what I didn't know. And this is just how it is. So it's not to put blame, it's just to put light on what we need to, as a culture, look at and be aware of. Because it's not just about, I mean, I would say probably even longer than 3 to 6 months beforehand. And sorry about that. And it's also things like, what is mom eating and being exposed to? What's the water she's drinking and stuff? It's not just alcohol. There's so much more. Is she in a moldy environment? Because these things can cross the cord blood. And it's very important that, the baby has the best chance to have, not just be there. Like, getting pregnant is such a low standard. It's that I want the best baby possible. I want to optimize this baby so they're the smartest, prettiest, you know, most capable baby possible. And that's what the research is showing that epigenetics will do for us.
Yep. So yeah, the epigenetic pressures can alter how genes are expressed is basically a way to summarize everything we just talked about. And excellent. And so for anyone who kind of missed as we're wrapping up here, this will be available as a recording on both our channels. But as we kind of come to a close, just any other things that you want to share with people, and if people want to reach out to you or they're interested in how you work, like where would you direct them?
My website is cancerfreedom.com. I would love to get to know you, meet you. You can look at my Instagram at Katrina Foe. And I am going to have a free ebook that I would be happy to send you the link for, that if you guys want to see the roadmap to cancer, prevent recurrence, that would be fantastic. Love to drop that to you.
Excellent. I would love to provide that. So I will put that in the link when I load this up. But thank you so much for taking the time to do this and to just let people know that there are a variety of avenues that they can explore when they are dealing with something that can feel really overwhelming, and that they have resources to reach out to. So just know, like, if you're on this journey or someone who is on this journey, you're not alone, and you have practitioners that can help you from a bunch of different angles. And one of the other things about the way that she works that I like, and why I wanted to bring this up, is it's very supportive and nurturing, because it's really easy to go to appointments with practitioners and feel like they're great, and then in between it's really lonely and you feel like you're doing it all by yourself. So it can be really different to work with a practitioner who's kind of there with you through the journey, or work with a group, because honestly, we heal better in community. We're just social creatures. It's just built into us. So just options for you. And thank you for taking the time. And this was great. So if you guys, if you want to learn anything else, or there's other questions we didn't cover, like comment below, and maybe we'll do another one in the future. So thank you for taking the time, and this was great.
Thank you so much. It was lovely getting to have this conversation. This stuff needs to be out there.
It does. So thanks for taking the time to do it, and I'll make sure this is posted for you guys very soon, and reach out to either of us with any questions. So thank you so much, and have a wonderful rest of your day.